We've got a couple of minutes to start before we start. I make it 12:18. So I'm just going to go and grab a quick glass of water before I cough, and then I'll. Right, risk of coughing and spluttering abated. Well done, everybody. I know it's nearly lunchtime. I know that our tummies are rumbling, and I know that this screen fatigue thing is real. So those of you who started with us at 8 o'clock this morning, well done. Those of you who are planning on continuing through with us till this evening, brilliant. Thank you so much. For those of you who've really just had enough, we completely get it. And I've now discovered how to get the recordings on demand. So by this afternoon, we will hopefully be able to say to you, go for it. You can watch everything in your own time. But that's not to take away from these incredible speakers who are here to share their so much knowledge. I've just come from the vaccine rollout presentation, which I found so enlightening, so eye-opening. Nicci, I know, is going to do the same thing. She's going to inspire you. She's going to motivate you. And she's going to also make you really proudly South African too. Guarantee it. I had the privilege of sitting in on an interview with her on Supply Chain Now with Scott and Greg, who I'm going to be interviewing later this afternoon. And just the story, the passion, the sheer desire to improve transportation, to improve the lot for women who work in this profession is just, I'm overusing the word inspirational since yesterday, but it's just that. So without any more waffle from me, let's hand you over to the lady of the moment who you all come to listen to. Please remember, if you do have questions for Nicci, to post them in the discuss. We'll facilitate that. And then if you can also just pop your comment in the poll at the end of the session. And I know it's not an enviable place to be, the slot before lunchtime, but keep your tummies quiet. Drink some water, because actually you're not hungry, you're thirsty, and enjoy the presentation. Nicci, over to you.
Thank you. Let's go. Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome from Cape Town. Jenny, thank you for those kind words. I spent the last couple of days thinking, what could I tell you that could inspire you? I mean, the lineup of speakers at this event are extraordinary. And, what was it in my story that could enlighten you and speak to supply chain? So I hope that there will be a couple of nuggets that you can take away. And most of all, I hope that I will create an awareness that maybe you weren't really part of in creating a more gender diverse and more gender equal workspace, because we know it's good for all when there is greater gender diversity. So let me start and get right into it. I grew up in a tiny little town of Port Shepstone on the coast of KZN, and opportunities weren't great. You kind of left school and worked for mom and dad, or got married, or you left. And I managed to secure a franchise to teach matriculants the rules of how to conduct yourself, how to speak, how to do makeup, how to walk with poise, and how to handle yourself, public speaking, and so forth. And what I didn't realize is while I was teaching them, I was preparing myself for business, because everything I taught them, I took into business. I then went from there into owning a home industry, starting at 4 o'clock in the morning and baking goods and making food and cooking way into the evening for the next day, because if I didn't have the discipline to do it, there wouldn't be anything to sell. And all those communities that I worked with that supported my home industry were reliant on me actually preparing some food. So I didn't want to face them in the morning. So it was an incredible learning lesson, those two environments, that I needed discipline and I needed to know how to really conduct myself in business as a young woman and to be courageous while I was doing that. So at the age of 19, I wanted more. I went off to the United States, and I often tell the story because this was the catalyst for me, and how I changed my perspective on business. So let me just get my screen sharing going. In presentation mode. Okay, presentation mode. Right, so I went to live with this very wealthy Jewish family, and they had the supply chain into home. And we don't often think about that. In our household environment, we have a supply chain and of services and suppliers that we work with beyond that of business. But in this case, they had a relationship with the butcher, and they would place the order with the butcher on a weekly or monthly basis. And the butcher would arrive and he'd knock on the door and you'd walk straight into the house. He would go into the basement and he would stock the deep freeze of everything that had been ordered in the correct portions. And there was no one standing there checking the list to see what he had delivered. We just trusted that what we ordered, we got. The dry cleaning, we would put out a laundry basket of shirts and blouses that needed to be dry cleaned, and they would be picked up, and the next day they would come back a day or two later, beautifully hung on coat hangers with plastic coverings, left on the porch for you to pick up and take and carry into your cupboards. And I just sat back and thought, what these two businesses had done, besides the fact that there was incredible relationships in place, but they had taken a pain point for these families, an irritation, a time-consuming task, and just made it easy and simple. And when I returned to South Africa in 1990, just before 94, just before the World Cup, the Rugby World Cup, I realized that I had to do something with these newfound revelations of what business could be, what service could be. And I went to work for a labor broker, and within 3 or 4 months, I realized what a horrendous organization they were, and they delivered no value. They dictated the terms of trade. They were just really very rigid and hard to work with. And I approached one of the customers that I was servicing, Avis Rent-A-Car, and said, look, I know that I can do a really good job. From the time that you phone me, I will get drivers to you within 90 minutes. I will get the list of the cars that needed to move. So back in those days, car rentals used to move vehicles from one city to another based on the bookings, instead of just upgrading someone from a smaller to a bigger vehicle if they never had stock. It was affordable. Fuel was cheap and we could do it. And anyway, I went through the list. I would manage the drivers. I would pull the vehicles out of the parking lot. I would fuel them, clean them, get them into a lineup, get them on the road, pay for the tolls, pay for the fuel, pay for the driver subsistence, deliver the vehicles, and get my drivers back. And that was a total solution that had not been offered to the car rental companies up until that point. They had to add all the bits to it, and they just gave me a thumbs up and said, Nicci, if you can do this, we'll give you that support. I got all the facilities in place very, very quickly from the banks, and obviously a different time to what we're dealing with now. And that was the start of my business. And I moved car rental vehicles for Avis, for Budget, for Europcar, for Tempest, nationally. Within the first year, I had opened up branches all over the country, and I had over 250 young men and women working for me. And it was a lovely little business. And that business grew exponentially to where we were moving new cars for the dealers. They were just overwhelmed by the fact that we could get a driver to them within 90 minutes. And overnight, be it Cape Town, Durban, Port Elizabeth, Johannesburg, we would get the vehicle to the customer so that they could, what that meant, instead of them waiting for these big car carrier companies that would take days to deliver, we could deliver a vehicle in 12, 14, 16 hours, whatever the driving time was. And that was a revelation for them. It gave them a market edge. And I realized then that I was onto something. That service that I'd experienced in New York is what I was now able to deliver the industry. During my time of running my business, I was awarded 6 business awards ranging from top CEO, top entrepreneur in transport and logistics. We held the longest standing contract for 17 years. And I think that was really a lesson of those relationships that I'd experienced and the value of that and bringing that into business. So, but not always easy, it never is. And I think in the pain, we grow. In 2008, we hit the financial crisis where we know the financial sector worldwide had been horribly hit, and we awoke to 2009 where the banks were not able to finance a single vehicle. If you had not placed your order and paid for your vehicle in 2008, you weren't going to get a vehicle financed. And we also realized in the late 2009 that the passenger and the new car market was not going to be sustainable because the fuel price had started to increase dramatically and companies were finding other ways to move vehicles. So we moved into the commercial sector. And that was in 2000. Yeah, we moved into the commercial sector. So from 2000 until 2009, we were moving brand new trucks and buses on the same basis we were moving cars. And we also grew exponentially in that market. We were dominating that environment. But by the time we got to 2008, we realized that we had positioned ourselves in the heavy duty market. So this was the extra heavy trucks. And the extra heavy trucks took a 54% knock in market share. And so did we. It was a realization that we hadn't diversified enough. We hadn't positioned ourselves with OEMs that sold the light and medium vehicles like Isuzu and Hino. We were primarily in the big space of Volvo, Mercedes-Benz, MAN, truck and bus, and so forth. And we rode that recession throughout, and we managed to get to the other end. And we built up to the Soccer World Cup, and there was life in the country again, and everything seemed to be fine. But in 2009, my dad committed suicide, and it was the most hectic thing for me and it was actually on Women's Day, funny enough. I couldn't understand it. He was my mentor. He was my advisor. He was my greatest champion. He was always in my corner, and it didn't make any sense to me. And I started to extract myself from my business and the pain I was in. I appointed people to run the business, but I stayed very close to my customers. And we encountered the worst fraud that you could ever experience. Was SARS. It was in the revenue that had been siphoned out of the business, falsified invoices to our customers. And my business basically came to its knees. And I realized that if I was going to save my staff and not impact on my customers who had been so loyal to me, I needed to sell my business very quickly. And it was a going concern. So all I needed was somebody to recapitalize it. And I approached a big corporate, and they were willing to take over the business and even offer me a job. I went and sat with my customers. And the first customer said to me, "Hell no. We want to work with you. We don't want to work with a big corporate." And what do you need, Nicci? How can we support you? And I said, I need money to recapitalize my business. I need better payment terms, and I need slightly longer delivery terms. And they just ticked the box. And 2 days later, $4.5 million was put into my bank account. And we changed our invoicing process. So we invoiced weekly so we could get cash flow in the business. And I managed to keep my business. And I also not only managed to keep the business, but I managed to reinvent the business. So we became far more agile, and we became the phoenix. and not the fire, because it would have been easy just to have walked away and closed, book. But I just couldn't. I was just so indebted to everyone that had supported me. We had an obligation to the OEMs that we were working with. I mean, some of the big corporate accounts like I had with Mercedes-Benz and MAN Truck and Bus, it's if we were in a financial position that we were in, we were obliged to notify them, and they could cancel our contracts. None of them did. They all stuck by me, and there lies the value of the relationships. Those relationships that I had learned back in New York came to fruition in that time. So we became very systems driven. And I can tell you that the fraud also occurred in a perfect storm where we had implemented SAP Business One, and it was a very bad implementation. We didn't get financial reports for 2 years, and that created the loophole for my FM and her team to siphon $9.5 million out of the business in 6 months. We had to restore and renew the business and act very quickly. But when I look at this lady, I just see this very powerful woman, and she just resonates with me. And I recognized that I was going to, I had become very ill. By 2018, I had cancer, and I was struggling with, I didn't know it at the time, but I was struggling with the symptoms. I was struggling to run the business and to remain resilient and empowered. I had this incredible client base. We had renewed most of our contracts, and it was the perfect time to sell the business. And I sold it off to a JSE listed organization. Now, up until that point, I was very aware of the fact that women were not equally and fairly represented in the sector, not as truck drivers and certainly not as employed professionals. And I decided that this was something that I wanted to do. And in the organization I was participating in, there were no women in Exco either. So I started the Commercial Transport Academy, and initially we were focusing on learnerships. But we quickly realized that we needed to be able to do more. We needed to expand beyond learnerships, and we needed to ramp it up, that it wasn't just a learnership of 10 women here or 20 women there. That was not going to change the industry. I also decided to do my master's in the underrepresentation of women employed in the transport sector, and that gave me insight to the most essential data that has driven the company I now run. And the data is there, women-owned enterprises. So these are women that make up the supply chain into the transport and logistics sector. Women are only making up around 10% of the total supply chain. We know that the transport sector is the third lowest sector in terms of female participation. Only below them is the mining sector at 14% and the construction sector at 10%. I mean, these numbers just are crazy that women are so poorly represented in these three areas. Within that 17.78% representation, women truck drivers only make up 1.1% of the working population. In terms of leadership and executive roles, women only make up about 10% of those roles, really struggling to impact and affect change in their organizations. And we know that, as I said, women-owned enterprises make up only 10% of the supply chain. It's just, for me, it was the fact that this was very disturbing and that I had to be a catalyst. But I realized that when I went into the market and I was having these conversations, I was early to market, and the industry wasn't necessarily ready to have the same conversation with me, but I was so hell-bent on making an impact and driving out my purpose that I wasn't prepared to give up on it. So one of the guiding lights for me was the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. I recognize that if I could create a project, and the one that I'll talk to you about now that I had in mind, we could deliver on 7 of the 17 sustainable goals. And these are SG1, no poverty. SG2, zero hunger. SG3, good health and well-being. SG4, quality education. My favorite, SG5, gender equality. SG8, decent work and economic growth. And SG10, reduced inequality. Yesterday, I sat with a professor of UCT and we were looking at how we were going to draw women from communities in and around Cape Town. And I was shocked to hear that in certain communities in the Cape Town area, and one specifically we were looking at is the people from Atlantis, which is some people call the forgotten people. They're for every one person working, they're supporting 12 people. And government tends to talk of 1 to 5, but now we're talking 1 to 12. I just know that if we can empower more women, these SG goals that I've spoken about, it's all there. We have to do it. There's just no way around this. So to make this happen, we went out to USAID and said, look, we need funds and we need a lot of money because we want to develop 915 women. We want to develop the communities that those women live in beyond just a skills program. We want to truly make an impact. We want to assist women prosper in the workplace. We want to assist women and enable them in the economy. And we want to assist women to succeed as entrepreneurs. To achieve these objectives, we designed 3 projects, and in all 3 projects, basically look at creating a more gender equal workplace. Now, these projects were, the first one is developing 300 entrepreneurs. So looking at that 10% supply chain, how can we impact on that? How can we find more women into the supply chain, develop them and give them an opportunity to be able to converse with the big companies? Because that is a major challenge, is when you're a one-man operation or a 2 or 3 woman operation, it's so hard to actually knock on the door of an Imperial or a Coca-Cola, a Grindrod and say, will you hear my story? So we wanted to do that. We then wanted to look at women employed in the sector. So if there's only about 17% representation of women in the sector and only 10% of those are actually making it to leadership roles, what can we do to enable those women to succeed? And there we designed a program, or we actually acquired a program from the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. It's an 8-month international diploma in transport and logistics. These women will also be supported with subject matter experts and industry experts. They are also members of SAPICS, which is going to really catapult them into what's happening in South Africa, what's happening abroad in industry. They can take that knowledge back to their workplace and empower their teams. And my goal is that these women will take along with them other women and men in the organization and derive really great diverse teams to work with. The final category that I'm really passionate about is truck drivers and bus drivers. So we're going to be developing 495 truck and bus drivers for their sector. To do this, we realized that women would be the last in line to be able to secure the 8,500 you need to go and get your commercial driver's license. So our project will pay for our ladies to get their license legitimately. We actually manage the driving schools and we manage the process where they go to the licensing office and do their testing. They then come back to me where I then go through a whole lot of soft skills around gender-based violence, budgeting, working in a male-dominated workforce or succeeding in a male-dominated workforce, and communication skills. We also go to the technical stuff of operating a vehicle combination, health and safety in the workplace, load general freight. So these ladies have a nice broad view. We then put them into a workplace host where they get up to 4 months working experience, building about 200 driving hours, and then utilizing our stunning training vehicles that C-Track have put these amazing technology. We are able to, camera technology and telematics technology, we are able to build a digital CV of these ladies' driving styles, and that makes them employable. So while I have been through my studies and while I've been in the industry, we've been running a couple of webinars. And what we found really interesting, specifically around the truck driver environment, is that 47% of the participants, and there were a couple of hundred people on this call, agreed that companies don't want to change the dynamics of their workforce to include more female drivers. But that means 49% did agree. And for me, that's the positive. If 50% of the industry is willing to change, that's a couple of hundred drivers that I can place in the industry. And that's positive for me. The other poll that we did is that we discovered that 81% of the respondents agreed that women were not aware that commercial truck driving was a viable career for them. And this is really because of the lack of role models. I mean, you just don't see enough female drivers for young women to look up and say, hey, I could also be doing that. There's a lack of female truck drivers across the sector. So women have gravitated to the fuel industry and the side tipper mining industry, but we're not seeing them in freight. And we do see some of them in bus, but they're not visible enough. And truck driving or bus driving is certainly not something that has been highlighted as a career opportunity. So we have some work to do as the CTA to really create this awareness and create the opportunity. On that first slide, what we discovered is why a lot of the companies didn't want to bring in female drivers is I felt that the risk of employing women drivers way surpassed the value. And this is not true, because the risk on long haul, we know there's been a lot of looting. We know that the truck drivers have been targeted. We also know that organizations trucks have been targeted where they employ foreign drivers, or there's a perception that they employ foreign drivers. So they've also come under siege by the crime. But in all honesty, if women are doing local work, forecourt to the back of the spa or the Pick and Pay or the Checkers, courier work, driving buses with passengers, all of that is totally possible, and it's worth our while. The other question that always comes back, or what do we do with them when they're pregnant? It was like, I don't know, dude. What do you do with women when they're pregnant? I don't even want to go into that because it's not worth the energy. But 94% of our respondents felt that companies don't want to change. Let me just change the screen. 94% of the people that participated felt that women are safe, reliable, and at least as hardworking as men. International data supports that women are safer due to and more risk averse, and this can also be put down to the reduced level of testosterone. They are less than likely to be intoxicated on a Monday and to drink on duty or arrive drunk on duty. They need their jobs, and they do a lot more to secure their jobs. They have better fuel consumption rates, lower accident rates. This data has been supported by Discovery in South Africa as well as international data. 92% of our respondents felt that transport line managers, fleet managers, and are not properly trained to deal with truck drivers. And because of this, we do a lot of work around empowering organizations to do necessary change management and change leadership to empower their drivers. I just want to have a look at the time. I don't know where I am in time. So coming to the end, creating a more gender equal workforce and supply chain. In order to achieve our objectives and to deliver on the goals that we set out with USAID, we need industry support to do it. We need organizations to relook at their recruitment processes and to find ways that when they're recruiting, be it the way they advertise, their driver trainers, which is a key role when they are testing drivers, that it is open. And I'm not saying have different standards, but it is set up that women recognize that you are an organization that is willing to employ truck drivers, female truck drivers. We need to adjust our policies. We need to recognize that women do fall pregnant and that we can use the opportunity to expose those ladies to work inside the office on debriefing, call centers, tracking rooms, tracking and control rooms, that they can use their skills and knowledge as a truck driver to be powerful employees within the office as well. We need more funding, quite honestly. Although we've got funding from USAID, we actually need more funding to increase the reach of these projects. When we launched the CTA Excellence Program, which is the project that looks at women employed in the sector, we only had 120 positions, but we've had over 400 applications. And what we didn't realize is that how desperate the industry was for a bespoke program for women to really identify with the industry. And when they do, and when they find their purpose, so too does retention of women in the sector improve. So we are looking for funding, and we are looking for organizations to look at their skills budget or their CSI budgets and say, well, this is a project that really can make a difference to the sector and to my organization. We need the support of leading associations to continue to work with us to create the awareness. And we need more data. There is no data in South Africa on this, how women are succeeding and where they're succeeding and why, what is enabling them to succeed, and what is, what factors are restricting their success. So we can start to make those changes and build the ecosystem. We know that they are currently building truck stops for women and men, and I'm very grateful for that. But a lot more work has to be done. We're calling on women in the sector to take women along with you on the journey, because that's the only way this is going to change. In your teams, look out your windows. If you're not seeing female truck drivers, ask why. Look at your supply chain. If you're not seeing more women participating in your supply chain, ask why. And if you can't find them, call me and I'll help you find them, and I'll help you get them into your organization. Raise the awareness of and if you have a voice in you in EXCO, raise the awareness of the need for greater gender diversity in your organization and women beyond middle management. Ask the questions. And, this morning, what was her name? I don't know where I wrote it. Cicely was talking about what leaders of the future will look like. Well, this is exactly this. We are building leaders for the future in our programs, and we're also thinking about the need for the future. And I believe that we can create a space for others to follow, and we can nurture the communities. If I could develop 100 women for Atlantis, and that empowers 1,200 people, of that would be a whole lot of children that can stay in school and go on to university, I know we would have made a massive difference. So I ask you, please get on board with us. Let us support you to support women in the transport sector and create a more gender equal environment. Thank you.
So if we were in my opinion, if we were in a room, people would be standing, I believe, and applauding you for all that you are doing. I'm delighted that we were introduced a little bit late in the day, but I hope that our community can help your community from a SAPICS perspective. I've got all sorts of hashtags running through my head. I'm also very blurry, and I promise I haven't had anything to drink. But, you know, it takes a village, and together we can, and all these sort of cliches that just become so real when you put it into those sorts of numbers with the Atlantis community. So thank you, Nicci, for all that you do. Has anybody got any questions for Nicci? I mean, you know, you can find her on LinkedIn. You can also find her through the Transport Academy. But, you know, I do believe once you've heard the story, you think about it a lot in your everyday thing, and every time you're driving. I know it's different for people working in the logistics industry already who are responsible for truck drivers, but certainly for lay people like myself, I look at truck drivers differently, and I count how many women there aren't. And I question, is it a profession I would want my daughter to go into, etc., etc. So question, think, and act. And those are the act bit being the most important of all, I think. So if there aren't any questions, and I know I'm supposed to give 10 seconds, and I'm supposed to, going back to Cecily, it's all about listening more intently and interrupting less. This is my new mantra that I'm going to practice. But I know lunch is calling, so we understand. But please make contact with Nicci. We'll make sure that her contact details are easy to find. LinkedIn is our new best friend in making contact in this online world. But you can make contact with her through the platform now. If you go to the attendees, you find her, you can send a chat. And Nicci, when you get a little circle or a little red flashing light on your attendees, that's because someone sent you a message. And if you don't know, ask us, because we're learning something new every day on this platform.
Thank you so much, Jenny. And thanks for everyone that was online. I appreciate it.
Okay, brilliant. Have a nice lunch, everyone, and we'll see you back here at 1:30 for an exciting afternoon. Thanks very much again, Nicci, always.
Always. Thank you. Ciao, ciao, bye.